Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about the second part of the Violator miniseries with Violator number 2. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. We can see here on the cover the Violator still stuck in his clown form right next to the most ridiculous mafia assassin of all time, the Admonisher, as they seem to be surrounded by the other Flebiak brothers. As I stated in the video covering issue number 1 of the Violator miniseries, I recommend you watch that video before watching this one. I've never known how to say that word my entire life, and one of my friends told me that it's pronounced Flebiak. Well, I have no way to contradict anything he's told me, and it sounds good to me, so from now on, that's what we're going with. Story: Alan Moore. Pencils: Bart Sears. Inks: Mark Pennington. Letters: Tom Orzechowski. Color: Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. We see that this story picks up exactly where the first issue left off, as the Violator is surrounded by the other Flebiak brothers, who are very menacingly letting him know that they are not happy with him right now. He seems to get a sense of this, as he states that he really doesn't have time to deal with them right now, as he's currently being hunted by a mafia assassin. They, of course, let him know that they're already aware of this, which is why they're here in the first place, as they have no intention of letting him sully their good name by being murdered by a human. We then see on this really cool 1 1/3 page splash image the Vandalizer grabbing Violator by the throat, picking him up into the air, choking him as he does so. As the other brothers look on, we see the Vacillator here, the Vaporizer, and the Vindicator. I should point out, at this point, they're kind of really starting to portray that the Vacillator is by far the least senior of the group, I guess I should say. He's often shouted down by the other brothers, and very often they seem not to consider anything he has to say or not want to hear his opinion on any matters. We then see that after the Vandalizer has made it perfectly clear what his intentions are, he throws a huge uppercut to Violator, which sends him flying through the air across the mall, which they are still inside of, by the way, despite all of the brimstone and fire and hell that's going on within the confines of the mall. And he then crashes through a large plate glass window on a storefront. We then see the Violator as he tries to pull himself to his feet, now covered in shards of broken glass, cut and obviously hurt from the impact with the glass and the floor. Unfortunately, the Vandalizer is not done with him yet, as he reaches in through the glass and picks Violator up once again, talking about things they did as children and how he always used to get irritated by the actions of the Violator, who is the eldest of all the brothers, and asks the Violator if he remembers. And when he doesn't respond, obviously due to dealing with all the pain he's in, he decides to give him a swift kick, sending him across the mall once again, and this time making him land, I'm guessing, in what was before the fountain in the mall, but is now some weird hell pit of liquid, as the Vindicator watched from afar, impressed by the feat himself. Vandalizer then tells Vindicator that he wants him to erect a hemisphere of Necreous containment, which is the fanciest way I've ever seen anyone write the words force field in my life. So Vindicator starts coming up with the magic needed to do so, and starts reciting an incantation in, I guess, some sort of demonic language. It really just kind of looks like nonsense. Or perhaps it's some kind of Latin that Alan Moore wrote there, but I can't make heads or tails of what it's actually supposed to be. We're then treated to this really cool 2-page splash image of the Vindicator using his magic to erect the force field over a large portion of New York City. I really like how Bart took the energy from his hands and made that into the panels that are showing off that some of the people who thought they had escaped from the mall realize they are now trapped underneath the force field, as well as Tony Twist and Alberto, his assistant, who were coming to check on whether or not the Admonisher had finished off Violator yet. And we also see here Shaft and Badrock from Youngblood, who I'm guessing were in New York City, considering they're based out of Washington, D.C., and it seems unlikely they'd be able to get here that fast. This has only been going on for apparently like 20 minutes or so. And this is kind of, I think, illustrate just how strong the force field is, as we see Badrock trying to punch his way through it, but he's unable to break it. Vandalizer then begins to praise the Vindicator for what a good job he did making the force field to make sure that they wouldn't be disturbed in what they're about to do to Violator. However, he's cut off when none other than the Admonisher bursts through the flames and believes that the four Flebiak brothers are aiding the Violator and trying to help him get away. But he then states that he has just one question: which one of them is Roosevelt, which is a callback to the first issue in the series. The four brothers are understandably confused by this question, as they all look at each other, not really knowing how to respond. And then Vandalizer just states to go ahead and kill the Admonisher, which the Vindicator happily obliges to, thinking that this is going to be an easy one-shot for him. However, he's unfortunately in for a rude awakening, as the Admonisher is not going to go down without a fight. Despite the fact that he is facing off against four demons from the pits of hell, the Admonisher wastes no time in pulling up a gun, sticking it straight in the mouth of the Vindicator, pulling the trigger, and blowing his brain straight through the back of his head. However, this doesn't kill the Vindicator, and one would assume that this is because he is an immortal demon from hell. However, the rest of this book is going to challenge that line of thinking, as we see his brain flying through the air as his brother, the Vacillator, tries to catch it before it hits the ground. Unfortunately, it slips right through his hands and splats directly onto the pavement. The Vandalizer seems to be rather irritated by the fact that his brothers are incapable of killing a lowly human by himself or by themselves, as he throws the Violator onto the floor and joins his other three brothers in their assault on the Admonisher. This is where we see the Violator propped up against the fountain as he begins to kind of wallow in his own self-pity, as he realizes that, you know, not only is this mafia hitman trying to kill him, all of his family is trying to kill him as well, and that he doesn't even have a friend in the world. And that's when he's interrupted by none other than the head, which is still lodged on his forearm, who states that he's willing to be his friend, when in reality, this is just the Violator creating an imaginary friend in the head that's impaled on his arm and using it as kind of a puppet to talk to himself. This is the point where the comic starts to get really silly and really weird, and I'm all about it. He then has the head ask him what his problems are and how they all started, to which he happily obliges in regaling him with a story, stating that his problems started in the year 1598, when his father was summoned by a, I guess, necromancer or sorcerer known as Dr. John Dee, who brought his father to the world of the living through some sort of incantation. We see the Violator's father depicted here as a super huge monstrous demon with multiple arms and legs, two mouths, all sorts of tentacles, really intimidating looking. He stated that his father had a lust for blood, but also for that of sex, as we see Dr. John Dee dragging a woman who may or may not be his wife. I read on some different websites that this is supposed to be his wife, though it's not in any way confirmed that that's the case within this issue. Taking her to the giant demon, Violator then states that his mother did not survive his birth, as did none of his brothers' mothers. as we see Dr. John D handing the baby Violator to his father, and the Violator then stating that, this is all stuff that he's had to deal with and it makes him angry. And the disembodied head then asks the Violator how he feels about his brothers, and he tells him that he hates them all. Also, this is kind of a weird point where there's some discrepancies, as in Spawn number 4, when Mabulja scolds the Violator and takes away his powers and locks him in the body of a human, he states that he made the Violator in his own image. So, I don't know if this is in fact Violator's father and he was, made by his father mating with a human woman, or if in fact he is just a demon that was created by the Mabulja. This is one of those instances where I feel like Todd and Alan Moore didn't really hash out all the fine details when Alan was writing this story. And so we're kind of left to wonder if this is really canon or if this is just Violator spinning another tall tale, as he did with the story of his battle with medieval Spawn. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the mall, we see that the Admonisher is actually holding his own pretty well against the other 4 Flebiac brothers, as he continues to open fire on them and really prevent them from figuring out any plan of attack. It's stated here that Vandalizer asks one of them to figure it out, and we see that Vindicator states that he can't come up with a plan until he puts his brain back, which kind of insinuates that apparently Vindicator might be the smartest of all of the brothers, but this is only lightly insinuated. Vacillator, is trying to come up with something himself, but also being ignored at the same time. And we then see that Vandalizer is really starting to lose his patience as he's continuing to be shot by the Admonisher, and starts to yell at the other brothers that, he is gonna, do whatever it takes to take down the Admonisher, and then he's going to make Violator pay for putting them in this predicament. Meanwhile, as we are brought back to the Violator and his conversation with his imaginary puppet head friend, we see that the Violator is telling him of how he's always hated his brothers because as they were growing up, no matter what kind of trouble they got into, his father always took the side of his brothers, despite the fact that Violator basically openly admits that everything they accused him of doing, he always did. We see that, he's basically trying to exonerate himself from any wrongdoing or blame in anything. However, the head, which is given the personality almost of a psychotherapist, starts to question the Violator, asking him, what his reasoning behind everything was, how he dealt with it. Violator responds by saying that he took the opportunity to finally kill his father, which begs the question of how did he do this? How do any of these demons die? This is a valid question, I think, as it's not really explained. Like, we saw Violator get his head lopped off by the medieval Spawn, and, he goes back to hell and is reborn by the Mabulja. But we've also seen, Vindicator get his brain blown out through the back of his head, and he was completely unscathed by it. So I don't know exactly what all the ins and outs of how demon lives are ended, but apparently you can do it by breaking nearly every bone in their body and ripping the top of their head off the way that the Violator did here, or perhaps he's once again just saying whatever he wants to make himself look and feel more important than he is. He then states that it's no wonder he turned out the way he did, given that he had to then grow up an orphan, despite the fact that his, orphaning was by his own hand, and that it was a lot of pressure for him to then take on the role of leader to his younger brothers. Meanwhile, on the other side of the mall, as the battle rages on between the Admonisher and the other four Flebiac brothers, we see the Vandalizer and the Vindicator trying to devise a plan on how the two of them are going to outflank the Admonisher. However, the Vaporizer has decided to take matter into his own hands, picks up the Admonisher, and throws him into his mouth, swallowing him whole. The other three brothers run up to congratulate him, telling him he's done a great job, thinking the battle is over. However, Vaporizer then starts to grab his stomach, stating that he's in horrible pain, as we see the Admonisher burst out of him, yelling, "It's admonishing time," covered in blood and gore, as the other three brothers look on, kind of, I guess, disenchanted by the fact that they thought they had the day won. Also, I'd like to point out, in this comic, the Vaporizer, the Vindicator, and the Vandalizer are all shown as having red blood, while the Vacillator is shown as having green blood. Also, every time we've ever seen the Violator depicted as bleeding, he has always been depicted as having green blood. I don't know if there's any significance to this, or if it's just an artistic choice that Bart Sears made. I'm not really certain. I always thought that they would all have green blood, being that they're made up of like necroplasm or something. But for whatever reason, three of them are portrayed as having red blood in this issue. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just, an artistic choice. Maybe there is some ongoing significance with it. We then see the Violator continuing to tell his tale to his imaginary puppet head friend, as he states that after he killed his father, that happened to coincide with the time that the Mabulja took over as the ruler over the 8th sphere of hell, and that he was very impressed with the Violator's work in killing his father, so he decides to make the Violator one of his top lieutenants and put him in command of the rest of his younger brothers, as well as other people in hell. And he states that things were really going quite well for him until he screwed things up with that Spawn guy and got banished to Earth. At this point, the head puppet tells Violator that he thinks the problem is that basically the Violator is a terrible, rotten person who deserves everything he gets. Which surprises the Violator, as it should, considering he's the one making this head puppet talk. He then gets very angry at the head, yelling at him that he doesn't want someone to tell him the things that the head's told him, even though the head states that he's here as his friend telling him the truth. The Violator states that he doesn't want the truth. He wants, insincere flattery. And then, in his rage, starts to beat the head into the pavement as it's still connected to his hand, yelling at it to take that. Unfortunately, he didn't consider the fact that he was literally just using his own hand to punch concrete as he picks it up with one of the fingers broken backwards. However, the head is now severely damaged on one side, as we see one of the eyeballs hanging down. And the Violator realizes that he's once again back at square one with no friends and a bunch of people who want him dead, but then realizes that he has a strange sensation in his head that he believes is an idea. The Violator then gets himself back up to his feet and makes a quick dash towards the exit of the mall, back outside of the mall and away from the fight going on inside between the Admonisher and his brothers. He starts to look around and get oriented into what part of the city he's in, realizing that the place he's trying to get to is not far, as he makes his way into the alleys and is surrounded by several homeless men, one of which is apparently supposed to be, or believes he is Jimmy Hoffa, one of which believes he is Elvis Presley, and another one who it's not specifically stated who he believes he might be. All are upset at the Violator for coming into their territory, as he states he wants to talk to their boss. They decide that they're going to carry him to their boss and make sure that he is dealt with properly. They even state that they're taking him the longest possible way around so that he can't trace his way back easily to find their boss. And when they get to the final part of the alley, they throw him on the ground, and he gets up and states that he could use some help, when a familiar voice states why on earth would he ever come to him to look for help, because he has no intention of helping the Violator in this instance. And on the final page of the story, we see that the one person that he is trying to gain help from also happens to be the one person that he has been going out of his way to antagonize at every step for several months now, and that, of course, is Spawn, as we see that the next issue is going to be called The Devil. We then see a page of image info. We've seen this dozens of times at this point. It's literally just a little blurb about upcoming image titles and books. Nothing special to see here. On the next page, we're given an issue preview of the third and final issue of the Violator miniseries, which, while still being written by Alan Moore, will not be drawn by Bart Sears. It instead was drawn by Greg Capullo. I personally was rather disappointed by this, in the sense that even though I'm a huge fan of Greg Capullo's work, I felt like what Bart Sears was doing on this miniseries was really cool and perfectly fit the tone of hyper-violent silliness that Alan Moore was writing. I scoured the internet a little bit to try and figure out what exactly happened that Sears didn't finish out the miniseries. The only thing I could find was a blog which stated that Sears at one point told Wizard that Todd essentially fired him from the project, stating that he wasn't working fast enough. However, I have no way of verifying any of that, so take it with a grain of salt for sure. I don't know that Sears ever stated that, and even if he did, I don't know that his recanting of the conversation that he had with McFarlane was 100% accurate. Like I said, just, you know, take it for what it's worth. That was all I could possibly find on it. We're then treated to a bunch of Violator fan art of Violator in his demon and his clown form. These are all pretty neat looking. I do like that they were printing these up in the back of these issues. I always think it's cool when books are willing to print some of the fan art that they're sent in, you know, even if it's only like a few images of the, I'm sure, hundreds, if not thousands they receive. This is something that's really cool. And it would be super cool as someone who drew one of these to see your stuff printed up officially in a comic book somewhere. We then see an advertisement for Spider's Web, which was apparently some sort of mail-away service where you could order comic books from. I don't know if they still exist to this day. And we are then shown an advertisement for a mail-away catalog for Ollie Optics, which I'm not sure what exactly they were selling in this catalog. I've never seen it or heard of it before. If you ever happen to see one of these or thumb through it, let me know in the comments what it was about, because I actually find this kind of interesting. I'm not sure what Ollie Optics would have been trying to sell on their own. And on the final page of the book, we see an advertisement for Cyberforce Universe Sourcebook #1, featuring an image of Cyblade. It looks kind of cool. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the Savage Dragon, which simply states, if you haven't seen the dragon lately, you're a dork. I don't know if Eric Larson was the one who wrote this ad, but he definitely was the one who had to approve it. And hats off to you, sir. You nailed it. And that was the Violator miniseries issue #2. Overall, I loved this issue. It's been about a decade at least since I had read the Violator miniseries, and going back and reading it for these videos, I'm really gaining a new appreciation for it. You know, this just over-the-top gore-fest comedy of just absurd silliness is really entertaining. There are several, you know, laugh-out-loud moments I had while reading this book. I really appreciate the story that Alan Moore told and the way he was telling it. And like I said, I really loved the way that Bart Sears was penciling this miniseries. And despite the fact that I am a huge fan of Greg Capullo, I'm really disappointed that he's the one finishing it out with the third issue instead of Bart Sears. I really feel like Bart should have been the one to pencil all 3 issues. Unfortunately, I'm not the kind of person who could make that call, and Todd apparently wanted Greg to take over the duties, or at least that's what we're led to believe. I don't know. At any rate, these are all just my own opinions. Your opinions could easily vary, but that's okay because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.